All right, so you have started to put together a game plan as far as, potentially looking at purchasing a home here in the upstate of South Carolina, but you're really starting to get, you may have put some questions in your mind you're not sure the answers for. So as we move into July and we're in the kind of the middle part of the summer season, I felt like it was a good time to start talking about what's the journey from a buyer, whether you've done this the first time you've purchased a home, or maybe it's been years since you did it the last. The idea of what to look at, and then at that point, how do you put together your search? Who should you talk to first? The journey from offer all the way to closing, and just kind of do a brief synopsis of what that should look like. So let's go ahead. Let's jump into it. Hey guys, I'm Bill Stewart, and we have been, it's almost the beginning of July, and I figured it was a good time to start talking about the buyer journey, because ultimately, I think right now is one of the better times and most strategic times for buyers in the upstate that we have seen in the last probably 5 or 6 years. Although it seems like, there's a lot of things out there where potentially could hold things back. But I think this market is an interesting market in that it's a great market if ultimately you are ready to purchase a home. It's not a great market for everybody, but if you're looking for, need to, or have been really starting to want to put together that you're financially prepared to be able to start looking at making this journey, I think it's a great time. So, when we get talked to buyers all the time, and one of the first questions we get is before we go and look at homes, what do we need to do first? Well, what you need to do first is you need to understand how you be purchasing this home. Is it going to be cash? Is it going to be finance? Is it going to be finance or cash, but it's contingent on a home sale? If you're looking at a home sale, have you got that house on the market? If it's on the market, is it under contract? There's a lot of questions that I want to know before we even begin the process of going and looking at homes. Before we even start talking about what they're looking for, I just kind of want to get an understanding of where are they and where would they sit? If they're looking at financing, whether it's based on a finance, like the home selling or not, I'm going to get them with a lender first, right? So at that point, go talk with the lender. Let's get the application process looked at. Let's see what you're pre-approved for. And then at that point, make sure that we're working in the right budget. I've made the mistake in the past of showing people without understanding where they are, basically take them at their word. I learned very quickly that at that point you can discourage. The fastest way to discourage, a buyer is to put them in a home that ultimately is outside their price range, and then try to walk them back into a house that is more in their price range. $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 could be a mean difference in terms of what a home looks like and what it has to offer, square footage, finishes, all of those things. So want to make sure that we're form-fitting our searches and our tours, property tours, to properties that actually make sense. Once they've gotten pre-approved, then understanding what are they looking for? What are the things that you have to have in the home? What are you looking for from a livability perspective, not just in the home, but also from the community in and around it? Where are you in terms of where do you spend most of your time? Do you spend most of your time closer to Greenville, Simpsonville? Where is that? And at that point, start to understand location as well as the must-haves in the property. Depending on where you are in the upstate, you might get more in a certain area as far as home size and home features than you would say in downtown Greenville on that same budget. But the idea is that we're basically now at this point trying to level set with our clients the idea that, once we know kind of an area, we're going to understand what that area's market looks like, what is the going rate for what they're looking for, and make sure that we're level setting all of those before we even put together a property search. Okay. Then as you start looking at homes, the idea that you're going to find a home potentially that at that point you're going to want to make an offer on. And so at that point, looking at strategies in and around how you're going to put your offer together, okay? Because not every offer is going to be equal, and not every seller as focused as much on the actual sales price as they are on what they're going to actually net at the end of the transaction. So what do I mean by that, okay? You could offer a full list price on a home, but yet at the end of it, depending on what else is made up in that offer contract, could potentially end up being a risk to that seller that they could make less than somebody who offered less with little to no risk. Okay. So when you're looking at things like, it's not just your price, but now it comes down to, hey, if you're, I'm willing to give you this price, and I'm going to have to finance it. So that means there's a risk that at the end of it, have you gone through the lending process, right? Even though you got a pre-approval letter that we would submit with an offer, the idea is it still needs to go through underwriting, and there's still a potential risk that you may not qualify for financing. Okay. Do you have a home to sell in that process? Because if you do, is it contingent upon that home selling in order for this to work? That means now at this point, not only am I worried about your financing, as the seller, I'm not worried about just about the buyer's financing working, but that I'm also now worried about the idea that will the buyer's home sell? So knowing where we are, not to say that as a home buyer, if at the end of it you have a home to sell, that could potentially disqualify. I think it just comes down to where are you at in the process, what's traffic, what's expectation, and then at that point, like maybe you're under contract, maybe you're already through due diligence. Well, that adds a whole different layer of like, that lessens the risk for that seller. If at the end of it I'm 2 weeks away from closing, and so at this point, like, we're ready to go. Great. But if I haven't even listed my home yet, it may not be something that a seller is willing to take on because of the fact that, like, how long is it going to take them to get their house on the market? From there, that, maybe we were on the market for 45 days. That means it's going to take another 45 days to get a contract. And then at that same point, it takes 30 to 45 days from that contract to close. So we could be under contract with these people for 90 days, and maybe we're missing other buyers, right? So understanding that contingency, that at the end of it, you could offer them $450,000 on a $425,000 house, and they may still reject the offer because at the end of it, it doesn't seem real that that's possible, right? Some sellers would take that, but I would, it's basically measuring risk. Okay. So in the offer itself, you got to look at your contingency. So you got finance, you got a home sale contingency, then you've got your inspections and repairs. That's another contingency that would be written into the contract potentially. Your termite and pest inspection, that's another contingency. It has to make sure that there's no termites or wood infestation problems with the property. It's outside of your inspections. It's outside of a repair request. It's a completely separate line item. Things like with the offer, there's typically going to be an earnest money deposit that comes along with. Typically, it's going to be somewhere about 1% of the home sale price. When is that earnest money due? Is it due in a couple of days? Are you trying to, or is that, or has it written in the contract to try to align it where I don't have to make the deposit until after my due diligence period, where I can no longer back out of the contract? It's a big no-no in my book. I will not accept that as a listing agent. It needs to be in at no later than 3 business days after the contract has been accepted, and it cannot align with due diligence. Okay. In due diligence, your inspection period, you typically have a timeline, sometimes 10 to 14 days. That's typically what I would want in a contract, no longer than that. Give people enough time to vet the property, inspect it, do everything. But in there, you would write in the idea that due diligence gives an opportunity for that buyer, for you as the buyer, to be able to walk away from a transaction with no questions, no nothing. You get cold feet the next day. You can terminate the contract within your due diligence period. But along with that, typically comes what's considered a termination fee. All right. So a lot of times people will try to skirt in $0 in a termination fee or $250 on a $600,000 home. In general, I won't take anything less than $500 for the most part. There's been times where my sellers have been okay with taking $250, but in general, I'm looking somewhere between $500 to $1,000 on a standard home, and it can go up. I've written them as high as $20,000 non-refundable, in terms of depending on what the price point is on the house. So if I'm writing a buyer contract, I would want to make sure if I really want the house and I want the seller to have comfort, then at that point, I'm going to look at the areas of opportunity. Yes, it is a home sale contingency, but we're increasing our due diligence termination fee because at the end of it, I'm not going anywhere. I want you to know that I'm committed to the house. And so looking at your termination fee could also be something that a seller looks at that says, you know what, hey, no harm, no foul. If they were to terminate, something were to happen, hey, I get $1,500 out of the deal. I'm willing to take it off for 10 days and I can explain it after that if there's an issue, right? So money talks and everything else. He walks away with $1,500 and he still has the house. So it's really like, how are you putting those things together, okay, to get that offer accepted? Now, Once the offer is accepted, now you start moving into your closing period, right? You're going to send that contract. As a buyer, you get to pick your closing attorney. That closing attorney basically acts as a title agent, where a lot of different states work with title companies. In the state of South Carolina, we have closing attorneys. They basically do similar functions, but they represent the buyer in the process. The buyer picks the closing attorney. Seller could either choose to work with that same closing attorney, or they can pick their own. It's really up to them. But in general, we're going to send the contract directly to the closing attorney, who then at that point will also be the escrow holder. So your earnest money, your good faith down payment, is going to be sent then to that closing attorney within the time stipulated on the contract. And then they start getting to work on things like looking at title, preparing deeds, getting all the information about that house, specifically HOA documents, whatever it may be. And the lender is now going to start working, because at that point, you're, as the buyer, going to actually now start applying for your financing. So in essence, the closing attorney is now working to get all the paperwork. Lender's going through and making sure that we've got all the finances put together, and the agent themselves is coordinating. Your buyer's agent is now coordinating with you in order to make sure that your inspections are going as planned, and that we're following the timelines and the time limits within that contract. If we have due diligence ending on a certain date, all of your inspections, we would want to make sure, my guidance is to make sure we get all those done in a certain amount of time, in order to then at that point make sure that we have enough time to present back to the seller if there's repairs that need to be done, to give them ample time to be able to look at it, review it, maybe get it quoted, in order to figure out whether or not they can, will, or won't do anything that we requested. And then at that point, make the determination whether or not do we want to proceed or not. Because once we get past due diligence, at that point, you are locked into a contract. That's it. You are now purchasing a home. It's considered an as-is sale at that moment. Basically based off whatever terms you may put in there from a repair request or those things. But anything that's not negotiated after that, if there's, you don't put any repairs in, due diligence ends, you can't come back and renegotiate with the seller after that due diligence period. You're basically locked into purchasing that property as it is. So it's important that we're following those timelines. So you've got your closing attorney working, your lender working, your agent working, you as the buyer are also working to get all the information to all these different people. And at that point, making sure that all of those things come together at the right time through to the actual closing date. Okay. And on the closing date, that's where all of, if you're taking out a mortgage, all of those documents that basically need to be signed off on as you acquire the property, that's the day that you're going to sit down and write out sign all of those documents. And at that point, once all those things are done, then the money moves from the lender into the closing attorney's escrow account. And from there is dispersed out to the seller. And then in exchange, you get keys and title to the property. And then at that point, now you're a homeowner. So it seems like it's a lot. It is. It can be overwhelming. And I think that that's where you need to make sure that you're picking the right team around you. So, you're starting with the right agent to make sure that you are able to communicate clearly, effectively, that they hear what you really are looking for, what you really need. And that also too, they're not just going to tell you what you want to hear, as much as being able to have true understanding and true dialogue around the things that you've said you're looking for. And sometimes, in my world, I'm always playing devil's advocate, in that you said this. Are you sure this is what you're looking for? These are the things that you said that were on your must-have list, as we start to rank and qualify properties as a whole. And then, and so all the way through the closing table, the other is that we're continuing to work. Our job, really, my job as a buyer's agent and as a seller's agent, really doesn't begin until contracts are in play. Then at that point, that's where the real work really digs in, making sure that we're getting the right things and that we're advocating on behalf of whatever client we're representing. That the buyer that I'm working with, I want to make sure that they're not walking into a money pit, that they're getting these things taken care of. And at that point, navigating with the listing agent on that property, things that we see that are problematic, and working to solve those problems in order so that my client doesn't walk into a whole bunch of expenses immediately after moving in the door. So, but you need to make sure that you're working with somebody who's going to do that for you, and not somebody who's just checking a box and at that point collecting a check at the end. So Really like interview, even when a buyer's agent, people will tell you you're not paying for a buyer's agent. You absolutely are. You are paying for a buyer's agent. As the buyer, you're paying all commissions. You're bringing all the money to the table, and it's important that at the end of it, you're picking the right person who's going to represent you at the end of it if they're going to walk away with any sort of compensation from that transaction. For us, it's less about the compensation from the transaction, as more that it's the relationship after. I never want to walk into somebody in a grocery store here in town who I worked with where I feel like I have to duck and hide because I didn't give them the right service or the right things. The idea is that I live and work in the community. I represent clients in our community. And so at that point, money is nothing other than a byproduct of a great relationship. Our main job is to make sure where we earn this money is making sure that we've protected them through the process. So I think it's hypercritical that you interview, up to 3 agents before picking somebody to make sure that you're getting the right representation, somebody who's going to represent you, not themselves. And then at that point, walk you through what that journey looks like. What kind of contacts they have. Who do they work from? Who are the lender contacts that they have? I look at it as I'm not a big fan of big box anything. So local lenders can pull things and miracles that big box lenders can't. I worked with Bank of America when we bought our house. I would not work with a big company again, because at the end of it, it felt like we were constantly chasing to get information, and it came down to really the last day of close and they were still dragging their feet to get things put together. Whereas I've worked with some really great local lenders, specifically to at that point be able to have a more, I would say, boutique style experience where at the end of it, they can walk you through every step of the process and they can pull miracles where others would not be able to. So I think it's who you pick and making sure you have the right team around you and getting things going. So do not lose faith. People will lose faith and they will get frustrated in this process. Sometimes I've had clients, they found their home on the first day, and then I've had others taken years, 2 years for them to be able to find the right property. And at the end of it, they found the right property at the time they were intended to. We work on your schedule, not the other way around. The idea is that it will happen when it's intended to happen. So just stay patient through the process, but understand that it is a process. And as long as you're following that process, and then at that point, the house will end up choosing you versus the other way around. Okay. So anyway, I hope this is helpful. I hope you guys have a happy 4th of July. If you have any comments, feel free to drop a comment in the comments. And if you have any questions or want to talk specifically about anything related to the upstate real estate market, home buying experience, even home selling, whatever you're looking at that you may have questions for, feel free to reach. Our contact information is in the description. I would be more than happy to help in any way I can. Talk to you guys soon.